Welcome back, everyone, to El Niño Speaks. And I have tonight, again, Jordan B. How are you, man?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I figured that we should definitely talk about this tonight, especially after just weeks of correspondence on Twitter about just the absolute state of subversion that has been taking place within the Texas GOP. And one thing that has always really caught my attention, apart from the obvious Israel worshiping you see from Texas Republican officials, is the really harsh reality of the demographic transformation that has taken place under the Texas Republican Party's so-called leadership since the 1990s. And in this period, for a lot of it, they have held not only trifectas in the state government, from the governor's mansion to state house and the Senate, but in some cases, for good portions, they've had super majorities. And despite that, the state just looks like the Tower of Babel in terms of just all this hodgepodge of non-white groups. And we're not just talking about the typical Hispanics, Mexicans, even Central Americans. We're seeing some of the weirdest combination of groups, from South Asians, whether they're Indians, Pakistanis, and then you've got Nigerians as well, and other
Somalis,
yes,
randomly,
you name it, all over the place. So, yeah, man, we both grew up in the DFW area, and what has been like the most striking thing that you've noticed in your time just observing politics about the demographic transformation of the state?
Yeah, I love this topic, man. Like you said, we're both from Texas and the DFW area specifically, so this is kind of very much both of our wheelhouse to be able to talk about this. But I think maybe just to start off, I think the thing that's been most shocking to me is the fact that people on the outside still have this view of Texas as this like based cowboy stronghold. And the
Try that in Texas.
Yeah, literally. I mean, like that's what we were joking about on Twitter, was like this mindset that Texas is still primarily populated by these base Texans who are kicking these people's ass if you're not white here. And it's like, to your point, Texas is much more of a hodgepodge, especially the urban areas, than you can even really imagine. That's what
I just pulled up the screen, just to interject. I just pulled up the screen of Dallas because this is going to be a good reference point for this discussion as we talk about how certain areas have changed. But yes, continue with your point.
I just think
not being so based.
I just think it's amazing how fast that reality has changed. You probably saw inklings of it. I think we're about the same age. You probably started to see inklings of it around the mid 2010s, when we really started to put the Indian immigration into hyperdrive here. But I mean, even in my childhood, 2008, my grade school years and entering high school, it was not like this. And the rate of change has not caught up with the perception of Texas at all. So people still do have this view of Texas, and they move to an area from out of state and they're living in an all Indian neighborhood. And it's surprising that they're surprised, but that is what it is.
So just give some perspective. I grew up here around Coppell, and 2009, when I graduated high school, I saw the first signs of demographic transformation, because you had predominantly the minority groups were predominantly of either South Asian, Indian specifically, or Oriental extraction, with large groups of South Koreans. My crew was largely South Korean, my high school crew. And then you had sprinklings of Vietnamese, which is a pretty big Asiatic minority group in general in Texas. Dallas and Houston have large Vietnamese diasporas, and then some Chinese sprinkled in there. But the school was still predominantly white.
Yes.
And the high school was predominantly white, but you saw the signs of the Asiatic population growing. And at that time, Coppell was actually fielding, for the first time in a while, like a credible football team. Like that was actually,
I remember that.
Yep.
Yep.
But now it's changed where it's become so Asiatic that its athletics department, for the most part, has just dropped off, and demographics largely explains that.
Yeah, that was surprising to me. I think we brushed on this briefly last episode we did together. Yeah, I mean, my adolescence, that's part of my memory is Coppell High School always being one of the foremost, athletic high schools in the area. And especially Coppell. I mean, the word you use there is perfect, sprinkling. There was always a sprinkling. And I think that's kind of the like the tipping point for diversity where it goes from sprinkling to inundated. And at least when I was growing up, sure, you saw sprinklings of this, like, maybe like, because in high school, I grew up, at least I went to high school in Valley Ranch, just a little bit to the east of Coppell, went to a small private school there. And just exactly like you're saying, there were 2 or 3 kids from South Korea who were there on a student visa. We had maybe 2 kids from India on a student visa. A couple Africans, like literally a couple Africans who had grown, like they were Americanized Africans who had grown up here their whole lives. And that was about it. And there was at that point, there was starting to be a very strong contingent of Hispanics, but that's almost baked into the cake when you're talking about the diversity of Texas. I'm not saying that it's like, oh, well, we just have to accept it, but I am saying that, like, I think the public perception of Texas is that there will be Tex-Mex, there will be Hispanic. Yeah. But the thing that we're talking about is unique. We are talking about this hodgepodge of groups, this hodgepodge of mismatched groups that make no sense to Texas itself. And it makes you ask the question, it's like when you look at the state of Maine, why is that the second largest or something like that population of Somalis outside of Somalia? It's like, why are there Indians here in droves like that? And we'll get into why that is, but just to kind of lay the groundwork for where you and I grew up.
One of the biggest demographic shocks that ever happened when I was in high school, and Coppell, for reference, and I think you kind of, and this is something similar to what you were mentioning, there weren't that many Black peoples. In fact, Nigerians were disproportionately represented in terms of the student body, and some West Africans, like I remember some Ghanans, but that was really about it. You didn't really have like the so-called FBAs, foundational Black Americans, but when Hurricane Katrina jumped off, there was a really good deal of like hood rat types that came in, and they stuck out like sore thumbs, like.
So I touched on this topic, and it's so funny. This is actually where you and I first crossed paths, was on Richard Spencer's show. The most recent video I uploaded from his show, where he kind of gave me a little bit to talk, where we talked about the demographics of Dallas and kind of the overall character of Dallas, was that Dallas, you could probably say this maybe stopped around. Well, I would disagree, actually. I would say that it still is what I'm about to say. But Dallas has always been a fundamentally white city, in my opinion.
It's white-coded for sure.
It is very white-coded. The idea of going to North Park, the idea of grabbing rooftop margaritas, there's a very common sentiment surrounding Dallas, even from people from other states and cities, that there's nothing to do in Dallas except do high-end luxury shopping. It's like, there's not I mean, there is a park, Clyde Warren Park, but even that is surrounded by a Micosina and a bunch of like nice shopping and stuff. So I think Dallas is very white-coded. And I don't know the extent to that's totally changed, but I don't think you can ignore that when you look at the character of Dallas. Honestly, much more so than a city like Houston or San Antonio.
That is so like Houston is rap coded.
It's totally like rap coded. It's like unless you are living in like an enclave in Houston, which in one of the nicest neighborhoods in the state, you are around people on 30-inch rims, listening to God knows what.
Yeah, honestly, even for like the migrants that are coming into Dallas, it's also probably really white coded because they think of like a blonde like bimbo or some chick there, like they want to get with, because that's like
from SMU.
Because that's like one thing, like Dallas does have that kind of like sex appeal that's like also very white coded, like the blonde Cowboys cheerleader or something like that. Like
exactly,
that's something that you don't see in Houston, definitely not San Antonio. And funny enough, with regards to the Asian trend, One thing that when I was in Austin, that is very shocking that people don't realize, nearly 10% of its population now is of like either like South Asian or
Wow.
Oriental extraction. Yeah, because of the
Wow.
tech sector. That's the GOP really bet big on the tech sector in Texas, and it's changed Austin above all because that's the tech city, like Tesla and Dell, all this like consortium of Silicon Valley, and it's also like just turned into like the California of Texas, if you will. But and quite literally, not just like whites from California moving, but you also have a lot of Asians from California too. So it's not a coincidence that when you base like a state's policy on trying to attract the tech jobs and all that, it's invariably going to have Asiatic immigration and then some sprinklings of like some of these more like striver class West African migrants. But yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Austin is a really interesting test case. I'm actually going there in a few weeks. Actually, I haven't been there in a few years, so I'm really interested to see. I know it's only like 3 hours from me. I just haven't made it there in a few years.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how it's changed. And I was going to ask you this to kind of break down the Austin thing for me. But before that, I think the Dallas in relation to Austin, it's kind of funny. Growing up, I always saw Austin as a suburb of Dallas in a way. Like Austin was kind of the little brother of Houston and Dallas in a way. What's happened in this last 10 years, and you can even see this on Google if you look up just like Austin skyline 2014 to 2024, just incredible growth, like even more growth. It's insane growth. But what's almost happening now is that Dallas is kind of becoming a suburb of Austin. Austin does have the smaller population, but Dallas is almost following in Austin's footsteps with regards to leaning into the tech thing, accepting the Indian immigration. Now, I know it's state policy, so it's kind of splitting hairs here, but I do see a lot of Dallas trying to be Austin in a way, not Houston, but trying to become like a bigger version of Austin. That's what I'm starting to feel from Dallas, at least.
That's an interesting take. You know, I've actually argued a lot of cities in the United States actually try to be like Austin in many respects. Like you look at cities like Denver and all these other cities that are kind of like up and coming. They're, in my opinion, they try to mimic Austin because Austin's always been a quirky city. Apart from it being like a leftist city, it's always been really quirky because even it's kind of different from your typical liberal city.
It is
because it has it has a really weird fitness culture and wellness culture that has actually kind of survived because historically Austin had like the typical hippie anti-war movement and kind of like more independent leftist streak to it. But ever since like Bell Laboratories and like Dell started to take off, it's gotten like a more corporate liberal type of ethos, but it's still has that kind of streak. You can see pockets of it in East Austin where you have like all like the yoga studios and a lot of fitness. There's a lot of fitness influencers moving to Austin. It's attracted almost a kind of weird instead of like it's nightlife is taking a beating, but it's instead has been replaced by a kind of like daytime partying thing.
Which is what Dallas lives off of. Dallas doesn't have much of a nightlife. It lives off of brunch. Brunch culture is huge in Dallas, and it's funny because Austin's old slogan was "Keep Austin Weird," and you hit the nail on the head with what I was thinking. Like, it's kind of sad in a way because it's kind of a double-edged sword because Austin is experiencing exponential growth right now. But at the same time, its mantra is going to go from something like "Keep Austin Weird" to like keep us bugmen or something. I mean, maybe they always were bugmen in a way, but like it's going to go from "Keep Austin Weird" to like we're the hardest workers at our company weird. You know what I mean? Like there's something lost there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's Austin is insanely expensive now, and one thing that because that's also one reason it compelled me to move for like job reasons I had to move, but it has become insanely expensive. And this is a trend with so-called skilled migration that when you have a lot of Asiatic migrants moving into these cities that are known for their tech sector, housing affordability goes out the window in a matter of like 5 to 15 years, depending on like the dynamics there. Austin has become prohibitively expensive, and it's actually kind of funny. This is something that's lost here too. Austin does not have much of a black population. It's like barely like 8%. And I've heard some projections it's supposed to fall to like 5% within like a decade or so. They're all getting priced out.
It's closer to a California. It's like a California.
Yeah, it's California
now. Yeah.
Exactly. The demographics are like pretty much of like California. And you could see like the same problems, the homelessness, the really expensive housing, and you can see it across the board. I liked it because that's where I went to university at and where most of my friend circles at. But you can still find pockets of that authentic Austin culture, like in East Austin. And it's actually surprisingly Austin, despite the demographic shift, compared to most of like Texas's like major urban centers, it's still like plurality white. It's still pretty white. And I think a lot of that COVID actually kind of facilitated that migration of a lot of whites from like blue states to Austin.
Yeah.
And it kind of retarded the non-white growth, but I don't think it's going to hold that much because as the demand for more cheap labor, the tech sector grows, I think you're going to see the Asiatic population just continue to explode there, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely. And you're seeing the same thing in the Dallas suburbs. So without doxing myself too much, I live about 40 minutes north of Dallas Fort Worth. So I'm still kind of removed from a lot of the things that happen in DFW, like the Dallas proper, but still close enough to where I can experience some of the fallout, I guess. But I mean, that's the thing is like, I guess we can get into this. I know it's kind of overused, maybe a little trite at this point on the right, but there is something in Texas, in the Texas ethos that just worships the GDP. So our leaders in Texas, I think probably Greg Abbott is probably most emblematic of this. They are willing to sacrifice the Texas identity if that means the GDP increases by a couple percent points every year. And they're very clearly downsides to that. Greg Abbott may not feel it. Ted Cruz may not feel that. John Cornyn may not feel that. But when you walk around, you definitely feel it. I mean, the best, they always say that the best way to get a feel for what the demographics of the future of an area will look like is look at the middle schools and the elementary schools. So there's towns even farther north of me by 15 or 20 minutes that are on paper growing at an extreme rate. Oh my God, they're growing at 20% a year. Oh my God, they just built a new shopping center in X city. But then I hear and I talk to people who are from these areas, in my local area, and they say when they drop their kids off at school, it's 70% Indian. And it's like, no, yeah. It was a red pill because I only have a 6-week-old. So my 6-week-old is clearly not in school yet. And I'm not totally familiar with like what the demographics of the local elementary school look like yet. But I pass by the local high school here and I see primarily white kids, to be fair. But then I'm hearing from the parents that have younger kids that are 6, 7, 8, 9, that most of their kids' schoolmates are Indian, and they have trouble hanging out with friends on the weekends because the Indian parents only let the Indian kids hang out with other Indians. And it's like, that is what the future is going to look like. That is what the future, and not just of Dallas, this is really, I don't want people to turn this off because we're just talking about Texas. This is what it's going to look like in major areas, whether I think in Dallas, red states, exactly, who have the GDP worship thing. Because why wouldn't you import 1 million Indians? They're low crime, right? They get a job, right? It's kind of like Vivek was talking about, that Indians are ideal because we work hard. It's like, yeah, dude, but like, that's kind of the point. You're not going to play on the football team. You're not going to go to the mall with your friends. Like, you're not going to have white friends. Yeah, they have a bug gene to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my take on that.
I mean, when you look at like the demographics of like India and even, and I don't argue the whole Indian subcontinent, like, which is like well over 1.6 billion people, and then West Africa, you have like these countries that are like basically dumpsters, but they have like large enough overclasses or upwardly mobile in these countries that'll just like hop on the next plane to like the UK or the US or Canada. And this massive class can like easily move to the US in a specific area and just not just like screw up like the housing market because of the increased demand, but also the demographics. And that's one of the biggest threats. And unfortunately, I've been saying this for a while, and I've tell people this because I've worked in the lobbying game before, and working there dispels a lot of wishful thinking and assumptions that people have about Republicans. Is that majority of the Republican Party, despite the whole talk of populism and America First pivot, it's
100%.
still structurally owned by the Chamber of Commerce.
150%. Yep.
The ruling class still answers to the Chamber of Commerce. So what'll happen is, and I think this is where things are heading, there may be a crackdown like at the margins, or maybe a legitimate crackdown on illegal immigration, but here's the freaking catch. There's going to be the passage of some bill or some type of legislation, or there's going to be a tweak in the framework that allows for expedited legal migration, or just bringing in more visas, expanding the visa programs. I've heard talks about this. I would go to UT Austin just to like go to like certain panels when I had like downtime, and I've heard people like pretty credible professors, think tank fellows, the people that actually craft public policy that's implemented like a decade later, saying that the legal migration system in the US, which I think it brings in like close to 2 million foreign aliens when you add in like the visas, green cards, and all that.
Student visas, all that. Yeah.
Yeah. They want to expand it like at a minimum, like their quota is like 5 million a year. That's like what they think to like address the challenges of the 21st century.
It's so backwards. It's so incredibly backwards too. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't think we've talked about this before, but in 2022, I actually worked on Don Huffines' campaign. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
I'm actually I've met him
solid. He's solid.
Guy.
He's pretty solid. Nice guy, solid. I do believe he's a paleocon. Aside from all that, this isn't a knockdown of him at all. This is more about the people that I talked to while I was working for him. He never really had much of a stance because the issue is starting to come to a head. I just think Republicans are going to be on the wrong side of it at this point. He was very strong on illegal immigration, but what I noticed being on the campaign trail for him was talking to a lot of these boomers and a lot of the people that we're talking about that we've encountered, is that when you talk to these people, your average white voter who's voting in the midterms in Texas, that's like a 90% white thing. Black people are not voting for the most part. Yeah, this is a white people thing. So when you talk to these people, these people are very gung ho about illegal immigration. They say things like, if I was living on the border, I'd shoot someone if I saw them cross my property. And I'm like, whoa, based, but like, I'm like, whoa, we're Fed posting here a little bit. But then when you try to expand the convo a little bit to like, well, what do you think about like the legal migration system? And like, have you noticed that like there's a lot of Indians here that group up and are messing with the labor market and the housing market? Their response is something like, no, they're hard workers and they come here and get a job and they don't commit crimes. And that was one of my earliest red pills as far as this topic goes with immigration, was before I finally knew all the stats and all the actual downside of legal migration, I had a hard time refuting that. I was like, wait, hold on. That's a good point. And that was what I realized the problem was. It's going to be hard to sell your average boomer on being anti-legal immigration because Indians do blend in a way. The Indian is not going to be out there robbing you. They're not going to be playing their music loudly at 3 a.m. So there's almost not an impetus for them to react as there is with like black people or even let's just go with like Venezuelans or something. They will say that about Tren de Agua, oh, TDA, we got to kick them out. They're killing people. It's like, I agree with you. I'm for that. But what about when they kill your housing market? What about when they kill the job market? They can't bring their brains there because it's legal and they're doing the right thing. And it's like, man, we got to get out of that thinking.
One of the things too, and here's a big red pill as well. Some of those same people that say like they will shoot an illegal alien that comes on their property or like literally crosses the border, they will vote for a Republican small business owner that employs illegal aliens.
Yeah.
Because there is a big sector, and I've noticed this in my time when I did a lot of like lobbying in state and Republican state legislatures. One of the easiest forms of opposition research you could do on like a potential candidate or an incumbent is look at this guy's business and see if he's actually like employing illegals. A lot like Republican strategists will tell you this. A lot of paleocons and constitutional conservatives will tell you this, that like if you find like some small to medium-sized business owner that's a Republican, there's a really good chance that this dude is employing illegals. There's so many cases of that happening. And that's the thing about skilled migration is that it's actually really dangerous.
Skilled.
So-called, legal.
Skilled.
Legal migration in general is very dangerous because it is a fast track for a lot of these migrants to become part of the overclass, and especially migrants from cultures where like scheming, hustling, and scamming is like accepted. Those people will do whatever it takes to like take the journalist job or corporate job and lord over whites and continue the system. That's why it's really dangerous. One anecdote I have, though, that is actually kind of ironic. I've actually found talking to some normies in Austin in the tech sector and even like liberals or people that are really politically apathetic, they will say really politically incorrect stuff about Indians, and it's actually kind of ironic because the Republicans would not even say that. But I've noticed because now these people are actually competing for their jobs. Like, because the thing is, for the average boomer Republican that's like a very active participant in like midterm elections, these are people that are pretty high socioeconomic status, or at least like upper middle class, and they actually benefit from cheap, like unskilled, cheap labor from like Mexican labor. And they don't really see the effects of having to compete with some striber class South Asian or West African migrant. But for some of these people that are like moving to Austin, some of like these young professionals, they're actually like, they're in the mix, and it could get really brutal. And having talked to people in the tech sector, the type of hiring process that the Indians engage in is incredibly nepotistic. And anytime I've noticed from stories, from multiple anecdotes, that these Indians start burrowing themselves in these companies, they will effectively like ethnically cleanse them through their hiring practice.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring it back really quick. There was something you said about if you want to do Oppo research on a Republican, really all you need to do is look at a Republican candidate's medium to small business, and usually you'll find that they're hiring illegals. Two things. One is that was part of what was appealing to me about working for Hot Finds. If you're familiar with their family, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to use this to shill him. I'm just saying, like,
no, I know some of his sons. They're pretty based.
I went to school. Yeah, I went to school with three of them, and they are based. I like them. They're good guys. And
good people.
If you know that, their family is good people. Their background, just compare this to who I'm about to say. I don't know his name, but you'll know what I'm getting at. Compare their background of owning a family car dealership and selling cars and kind of building something from the ground up with their own skills. Like, working building a car dealership from the ground up, you're probably not dependent on Pranjab from Bengali to come there and sell cars. Like, that's probably something you likely built up with like your skills and your business acumen and stuff like that. The person, and you may know this person, I cannot think of the name, but the person who founded Colony Ridge, which is the illegal immigrant settlement that currently houses somewhere, I don't know that it currently houses it. They expanded the land outside of Colony Ridge, which is about 2 hours west of Houston, to be an entire illegal immigrant settlement. So it currently houses somewhere between 40 and 50,000 illegal immigrants. If you wanted to do mass deportations, you would start at Colony Ridge. The person who founded Colony Ridge was a big donor to Greg Abbott. And that's why Greg Abbott won't shut it down. I forget the name, but he's a major name in Texas politics.
I'll look into that. But yeah, continue.
But just compare how they treat Colony Ridge, right? With, you have these he's a small business owner, medium-sized business owner, makes it big and finds it profitable to funnel money to Colony Ridge, which houses somewhere between 40 and 50,000 illegals. And they just made room for it to house about 200,000. Current Revolt did a lot of good work about this. That will not be touched. That will not be touched. As for all the tough talk, like you just said, for all the tough talk about we're going to kick them out and I'd shoot them if they were on my land, these people will not fundamentally ever alter something like Colony Ridge. So yeah, might have been the Wilkes family. I'm not sure. It's going to bug me. But yeah, Colony Ridge is a major deal, and it will likely not be touched for that reason because it's beneficial to medium-sized business owners.
Yeah. That is interesting. One thing I will say this.
Here we go. It was two brothers, John and Trey Harris, and their cousin Kevin Harris. They own the development company. According to Wikipedia, their business model has been described as relying on land sales and predatory lending practices. So what they do is they buy up the homes. So the illegals don't have social security numbers to actually finance the homes themselves. The Harris brothers and their cousin Kevin buy up all the houses that they build on this land that they cleared with clearing from Abbott, and then rent the homes to the illegals, and it's just a cash business. So yeah, Colony Ridge is a huge problem, and it's only going to grow. And there's a reason that when all these based mass deportations in Texas are happening, they'll never touch Colony Ridge because those people are funding Abbott.
Yeah, they won't touch a lot of some of these like small and medium-sized businesses either. And also this is noticeable in the South. A lot of these chicken processing plants and in general have really large illegal alien workforces. I even remember, man, the freaking root of all media outlets was actually like praising the deportation of illegal aliens from some of these food processing plants in the South because a lot of that was displacing black labor. But then like the root got new ownership and it's moved in a really different direction.
That's
you
so
know what
funny,
I mean,
man. Oh yeah, new ownership. Oh man, I know exactly what you mean.
And
that was one of the early things for me. Also, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade when that documentary Food Inc. came out. Remember that? Yes. The documentary that talked about how our food. It really started people down the track of for example, I think the end game of Food Inc. is something like the Make America Healthy Again movement, because you had the initiating of like, hey, our food is unhealthy. It was a throwaway line, and I don't think they intended for it to be like a red pilling moment for people. But in the movie, they talked to a chicken farm white guy or lady in North Carolina who owned a chicken farm. And she says it as a throwaway line, and it didn't resonate with most people, but it did for me. And she said, up until about the 90s, it used to be mostly black men doing the labor, and now it's mostly Hispanic. And I was like, wait. And I was a young kid. I was like, wait, why did that change, huh? And then it made sense. It's like, I mean, say what you will about black labor. I will concede, some of the my 15-minute break started 30 minutes ago. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But say what you will about it. There was a path for blacks to kind of get a foothold without a college degree in things like construction, agriculture, and yeah, I mean, you just have an undercutting of that. So first it undercutted the black labor because that was the lowest form of labor. But now it's slowly moving up the food chain where, a white guy who graduates in computer science cannot find a job because now the Prandar and Sithun have moved here and they'll work for 50,000 a year and they'll pack in to a 2-bedroom apartment and move 6 cots in there and they really don't need as much money. Like,
Yeah.
but what's the argument? If you're a GDP worshiper, what's the argument against it? If you worship just the numbers on the spreadsheet, what's the argument against that?
Big red line go up.
No, literally. It's like, yeah, let them in. They're doing the jobs. They don't commit crime. They don't complain. They don't go on welfare. But it's like, yeah, but your kids are not going to have any friends in school and the football team is going to become no longer. You're not going to have a football team anymore.
Yeah.
Social fabric
team.
Social fabric is just melting in front of these people.
Yeah.
And they're like, but in theory, we're making more money. It's like, who cares about theory, man? Yeah.
Like, also the we. I mean, I would challenge that because like it's gonna be like a small cabal of people that is gonna be making money. Yeah.
Very small cabal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, it's wild stuff that, I mean, the thing is, I've heard some of these stories as well, and I'm not sure if you can vouch for this, but there's a lot of UT graduates, especially from like the STEM. If you're like a white dude, it's like a STEM graduate, they're like telling me that it's become insanely difficult to find work now these days. And that some of these guys, when they start going internationally, they'll like apply for jobs like in China or even some weird countries like Belarus, they can get like instant offers. But in the US, it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah, I've heard that too. There's a follower of mine who he recommended a book to me that actually just came in the mail today. But that's what he was saying, was that he found more success in the tech world applying to Chinese companies.
Yeah.
And it even, I mean, this ties into a whole what I talk about on my show, more gender relations and stuff like that. But it even ties into that because who's primarily populating these recruiting and HR departments? It's young women in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, who they don't have any tangible skills like coding or anything, but they do know how to talk to people. I have a degree in people talking, and they work in recruiting. And instead of hiring, and these are directives from the company, but instead of hiring, John Smith, who just graduated from UT, they're going to hire Prandar, who will do the same job for $10,000 less. And then how do you expect, John Smith to get married when the dating market is the way it is? So it even ties into that. I mean, it's like, what leg up do they have? Not even a leg up. How do you expect them to make their way in the world when they can't even get the job they were promised by the boomers out of college? That was the promise of college. And those are the same boomers that are advocating for unlimited H-1B migration. So it's screwed all the way around, especially in Texas, man.
Yeah. The whole dating market thing is a whole can of worms in of itself, because it's like just starting a family now is going to become like a distant memory for a lot of people. It's going to be a totally distant prospect, I meant to say, because of the simple fact that it's so cost prohibitive in many cities, the housing markets and the whole 9 yards. And also, when you have a bunch of foreigners moving into a city, like it kind of triggers like a biological response for people to not want to like reproduce it. It's actually kind of like civilizationally blackpilling.
100%. And yeah, I mean, that's why I think the whole dating market thing and like the manosphere stuff, it's inseparable from economics. A lot of people try to compartmentalize them and say, well, what does that have to do with the other? I was talking with someone about this the other day who works in like corporate America, and I was trying to tie them all together, and they were like, no, what do you mean the Indian migration has anything to do with the dating market? It's like, no, it does, because they are pricing out the labor of the guy that you would find attractive. So clearly you're not going to date the Indian guy, because Indians routinely score lowest on the attractiveness response scales on the dating apps. So you're not going to respond to him, but you're also going to not respond to John Smith or whoever, because he has been priced out of the dating market. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a very complicated thing, but it is all tied together. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to take this to gender route. That's usually where I go on my show. But yeah, I mean, you can't ignore the economics of it. You know, women today will say, you know, I just want a guy who loves me and respects me, but also makes $100,000 a year. But he also can't make $100,000 a year working at Walmart. He needs to be making $100,000 a year at JP Morgan. And, you know, when you get more and more women who are making that $100,000 a year, the dating market becomes, like you said, cost prohibitive. So, I mean, that's why you're going to see a decrease in families. It becomes cost prohibitive. You're going to see extended adolescence. You're going to see things like guys never really exiting the high school or college years, which is what we're seeing. You know, as much as people want to paint that as a sign of, what do they call it? Men never leaving the nest, or delayed launch. Failure to launch is what they call it in sociology. As much as they want to blame it on the men, I don't think it's inseparable from the economics of it. Because like I said, as long as you have men who don't have a financial path forward, you're not going to have them get married. I mean, sure, there will be a few women here and there that are willing to marry at or below their financial parallel, but most women won't. And that's what you're seeing on TikTok. That's what you're seeing on Twitter. All these women saying, oh, I'm 32 and I spent my college years partying and there are just no good men out there. It's like, yeah, it's because the labor market has priced out the men that you would be dating. But, you know, it's really hard for women to take a step back and look at it like that. So,
yeah, let's go the dating direction. One thing that I've been in the whole, I don't really do a lot of like going out much as before, but I've been in that whole red pill pickup scene. I had like a phase back then. And one thing I've noticed as the US has gone more diverse, and I'd say this is the broader Anglosphere, because I trade notes with guys in the UK and Canada, is that as these countries become less white, and at the same time they start to become more dangerous because of these new migrant groups, nightlife just dies, because it turns into like a security issue for chicks. So naturally, with the advent of social media, dating apps, and like Instagram and all that, a lot of these chicks will go on these apps and stuff. And I consider social media almost a dating app as well, especially if it has a DM function. If, like I tell, like guys always tell me, like treat like any app that has like a DM function as like a dating app. And so what happens is, a lot of these chicks, not like most of the guys they want to go after obviously are going to be like white guys that have like their finances on point. But as a lot of these, like the white population not only gets displaced but also disempowered economically, it's going to only be like a really select few guys that match all that criteria, or they have to start settling for some of these striver class migrants, which they like nobody really wants to deal with, especially like South Asians. And a lot of the South Asians that I know that have been with white chicks, in my opinion, from what I've seen, especially in Austin, that's just straight up sugar dating. And I've talked to guys, and I've seen it as well, that a lot of some of these South Asian guys that hit the jackpot, they just straight up buy their way into this stuff. And it's a trend I've seen take off in Austin, because sugar dating has become really big in cities where there's like a housing affordability issue, and especially university towns, like in DC and New York, it's very common that you see that any like semi-attractive chick that's like in university, they've got some type of sugar daddy arrangement or even multiple arrangements.
Yeah, I mean that's what the theory is, at least, that's what's going to arise out of this is kind of the rise of hypergamy and a trend away from monogamy. But here's the thing with that: there's going to be a counter trend to that.
Yeah, there's going to be a correction.
There's going to be a correction because the people who are participating in hypergamy, like the woman that you're describing who's going on the date with the Indian guy, that they're the South Asian that she doesn't really find attractive, they're not going to procreate. That is not going to be a marriage where they're having 6, 7 kids. What you are starting to see the rise of, and this makes me a little more optimistic, and I don't want to get into religion necessarily, but more just kind of the societal implications of it. You are starting to see a rise of like a re-rise of the couples getting married a little younger, the rise of the traditional Latin mass. If you go to any of those, it's primarily young people, and they're dating young, and the people there have 5, 6, 7 kids. So I think there will be a birth rate correction in a way, but that's still not going to help the average Joe who's getting boxed out of the labor market by Hispanic. Well, not in this case, we're not really talking about Hispanic migration, but who's getting boxed out of the labor market by Indian migration and just cannot find somebody who wants to settle down and have kids. That's not going to solve for that unless people just become religious pilled for the effect of finding a mate. And I just don't see that because people aren't really willing to give up all the fun toys they have nowadays. I don't see that girl that you're describing, the blonde girl from UT. I don't see her just like starting to go to mass and becoming Catholic and following the tenets of the faith just to find a guy. I think that the current situation is way too comfortable for women for them to en masse choose something else. So I'm not optimistic about that part, at least, but I do see some correction happening on the religious side.
I observed that too in one of my previous political jobs. That was almost half the people there were homeschooled, and they all young families, well above replacement rate.
Oh yeah,
and there's going to be some segments of the population. I've noticed this too as well in some places like Idaho and even the Ozarks regions of like Arkansas, Missouri. I've seen this, but it's definitely not a national trend because, as you said, women, the modern day woman that's like young and is college educated and has a corporate job, they're having a party. Like, yes. And they benefit tremendously because they get insane attention. And I'm not even talking about hot women. I'm like the mids. Like these chicks are oftentimes being hit up by dudes that are well out of their league. That
there is nothing about the current situation that if you're just a normie woman who's not like the ugliest woman to have ever walked the earth, like if you are like a 4 or above, this is like literally the best time in history to be a woman and extract the max amount of resources from every guy you encounter. Free drinks, dinner, plane trips, island trips, boat trips. You could get it all if you're a woman. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that the situation is so enticing for modern women that I'm actually even surprised that there aren't even more women. That I'm surprised that there even is kind of a rising of the birth rates among the super religious, because I would think that those women would just get sucked up into modernity. But yeah, dude, the bargain is too good for women right now, and it's going to have to get worse before it gets better. But nobody wants to touch that, though. Nobody wants to tell a woman that, like, you know, you would be happier if you didn't go to college and you went to church and found a good guy. And you know, the other thing is that modern women think that those two are mutually exclusive. You can find good, successful guys at church. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
It's not like the 1800s where Billy the farmer who, makes a subsistence living off of the wheat fields each month. Like, no, like there are successful, smart guys in the churches at the youth program, but they're not even willing to give up like the birth control and the possibility of finding their version of George Clooney out in the dating market because they think they deserve it.
They're not willing to give up Instagram.
They won't give it up, man. That's the problem, man, because what that does is it opens up modern women. This is what I always say. Modern women not only think that they should be dating George Clooney, they think they deserve George Clooney, regardless of how they look. And that's obviously a stand-in for Chad, but like they think they deserve the hottest guy who makes
Mr. Big.
all you have to do is look at the videos of women being asked in the street interviews what they would be willing to accept as an annual income for their future husband. And they're throwing out numbers saying 650,000, 300,000. They have no relationship to money. They don't have a relationship to numbers. These are just numbers they've heard. But it also shows that they think that they deserve that and that that's what's coming to them. That's a modernity problem, man. And I don't know how you fix that. Yeah.
Like, some of these like requirements, like 6 figures, 6 foot, and 6-pack abs is like, dude, like, do you want like Bruce Wayne at this point?
The paradox is that any guy who they find like that, by nature of modernity, will have a Rolodex of 100 women, all more attractive than her, all that he's with. So it's like they do need to settle down, not settle down like get married, but settle downward. But they're just not willing to do
reality
that.
check.
They're not even willing to settle at the same level as. You have a lot of women who make $90,000 a year, and a guy making $90,000 a year isn't enough for them. That's what I'm saying. And it's honestly, it's parallel to the labor market. The guys are getting undercut at every step. And as you get higher and higher up the pyramid, there become less and less viable options for employment and for marriage. In this case, it's women having less options for marriage. In this case, it's men having less options for labor. And we're really coming to a tipping point, like the tip of the pyramid here. And I don't know what happens. I think you get something like societal revolution at that point.
Yeah, societal collapse.
Societal collapse, revolution, whatever you want to call it. We're really getting to that point very quickly, actually.
Yeah, actually, it is like a form of cultural collapse. I think the so-called Arab Spring as well. A lot of sociologists argue that it's basically just a bunch of young Muslim Arabs that weren't just getting their fuck on, and so like they just like got channeled that energy towards like radical Islamism and other stuff. And this is actually observed throughout history that when you have these major displacements and dislocations in the sexual marketplace, when you have a ton of idle men with sexual grievances, they're going to channel that into like radical politics or some type of upheaval. Something's going to jump off soon. And like it's not going to hold. There's going to be a correction, but I don't know what that correction is going to look like.
Yeah, I don't know what the correction looks like either. What I'm trying to tailor a lot of I think this is where you and I kind of cross paths, was a lot of my content is really geared towards like talking to the young men and not in a Jordan Peterson type of way, this flowery, if you just hold her hand and look into her eyes, she's gonna want to marry a big guy. It's like, no. You need a much more realistic view of gender relations in 2025. It is not 1950. It is not 1975. So yeah, that's what a lot of my content is geared towards. I think you really hit the nail on the head with the geopolitical stuff, and not that that's out of my intellectual depth or anything, but I think you really have your finger on the pulse with that. I really focus a lot more on the gender, societal changes, and I think it's kind of like investing in Bitcoin early. I think that it's going to become, I mean, the Andrew Tate is a reflection of that, of course, and I'm not anti-Tate.
Yeah, red pill.
I think you're going to get more of that. I just think that I'm a Catholic, obviously, so I think it needs to be looked at through more of a moral lens. But that's just me. That's where a lot of my content is geared towards.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot to wrap up the conversation, Jordan.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
go ahead and plug your content because it's really good. I like the relationship dynamics that you touch upon there.
Thank you, man. Yeah, on Twitter, it's Jordan B Videos, except the videos, the O in videos is a zero. So Jordan B VIDE0S. And then YouTube is Jordan B Video spelled normally. So VIDEOS. So YouTube and Twitter are the two best places to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Yeah, man. Have me on anytime. I love talking to you. You got to come on my show sometime, man.
For sure. Yeah, I'm definitely down for that. And we can definitely make this a monthly routine. But yeah, as always, to my audience, thank you for tuning in. And with that, El Nino has spoken.